He didn't even finish his coffee. One look at her coat and he walked out of the cafe without saying a single word. She stayed there alone, holding the fabric tighter than she ever held anyone in her life, wondering how a blind date could make you feel invisible in less than 10 seconds. What he didn't know was that the coat wasn't a mistake, and the woman he just left behind wasn't who he thought she was. She arrived 20 minutes early. Not because she was nervous. She had long ago learned how to hide nerves behind quiet discipline, but because she always arrived early to places where she wasn't sure she would be welcome. Being early gave her time to read the room, to decide whether she should soften her voice, lower her eyes, or keep her coat on even when the cafe was warm. The coat lay folded on her lap like something fragile. It was brown, simple, slightly worn at the edges. Anyone else would have left it in the car or hung it on the back of the chair, but she held it with both hands, fingers wrapped into the fabric as if it anchored her to the chair. The cafe was small, the kind of place people chose for first dates when they wanted to appear effortless. Exposed brick walls, soft yellow lamps, jazz so quiet it barely dared to interrupt thoughts. She ordered nothing, she just waited. When the door finally opened and he stepped inside, she recognized him immediately from the photo. Tall, clean-cut, expensive watch, the confidence of a man who never wondered if a room would accept him. He scanned the tables and found her. His eyes met hers for barely a second before drifting down, not to her face, not to her smile, but to the coat resting on her lap. Something changed in his posture. It was subtle, a tightening of the jaw, a delay in his step, a shift so small that only someone who had spent her life reading micro-expressions would notice. He reached the table and didn't sit. "Is that yours?" he asked, gesturing at the coat. "Yes," she said softly. There was no judgment in her voice, no defense, just truth. He nodded once, already stepping back as if the chair beside her had become suddenly unsafe. "I don't think this is going to work," he said. No explanation, no awkward laugh, just a statement delivered with the casual certainty of someone who had never had to wonder how rejection felt. She opened her mouth, not to beg, never that, but to ask a question she didn't even know how to form, but he was already turning away. The chair across from her remained empty. For a moment, she didn't move. People around them pretended not to notice, the way strangers do when someone else's humiliation threatens to become contagious. Then she whispered, almost to herself, the only sentence that escaped her throat. "It's just a coat." He paused for half a second, not long enough to turn back, just long enough to hurt more. And then the door closed behind him. For 3 full breaths, she stayed perfectly still. Not because she couldn't move. She could have stood up, chased him, thrown the coat at his back if she wanted to. But she had trained herself, over years, to do the opposite of what pain demanded. Pain wanted spectacle. She gave it silence. Across the cafe, a couple laughed too loudly. A spoon clinked against porcelain. Someone's phone buzzed. Life kept going, as if nothing important had just happened at table 7. Her hands tightened around the coat. The fabric smelled faintly of rain and clean laundry. It was the only familiar thing in a room that suddenly felt hostile. She forced her gaze to the menu, pretending she had been waiting for a friend, not a stranger who had decided her worth in one glance. When the waitress approached, the young woman's smile faltered, just slightly, like she'd seen the walkout and didn't know what to do with it. "Can I get you something?" the waitress asked gently. A tea, please, she said, because ordering something made her look like she belonged. The waitress nodded and walked away. But when she returned, she didn't bring just tea. She placed a cup down with both hands, careful, almost respectful. Then she slid a small plate beside it, a warm pastry, untouched. I didn't order that, she said. It's on the house, the waitress replied. Her first instinct was to refuse. Free things always came with expectations. But the waitress leaned in slightly and lowered her voice. It's okay, she whispered. I'm sorry he did that. The words hit harder than the walkout itself, not because of pity, but because someone had witnessed it and chosen kindness. Thank you, she managed, keeping her eyes on the steam rising from the tea so her face wouldn't betray her. The waitress hesitated, then spoke again, even quieter. Do you want me to call someone for you? She almost laughed at the irony. She had plenty of people she could call, entire teams that would answer on the first ring, drivers who could pull up in 60 seconds, lawyers who could rewrite someone's life with a single letter. But she didn't call them. Instead, she said, No, I'll be fine. The waitress nodded as if she understood more than she should, then turned to leave until she stopped, mid-step, and glanced back like she'd forgotten something. Oh, the waitress said, eyes widening a fraction as if a name had surfaced in her memory. Sorry, I thought you were someone else. But her face said the opposite. Her face said recognition. Before the woman could ask another question, the waitress hurried away, disappearing behind the counter. She stared at the tea, untouched now. Her fingers loosened on the coat for the first time all night. Outside the large front window, the man who had walked out stood on the sidewalk, already scrolling through his phone, expression relaxed again, relieved even. He didn't look back once. A car slowed at the curb, its headlights sweeping across the cafe floor. She felt it more than she saw it, the subtle shift in energy when something expensive enters a normal street. The car wasn't a limousine. It didn't need to announce itself like that, but it was unexpectedly high-end, dark, sleek, and quiet in a way that made ordinary vehicles look loud. It stopped, and in the reflection of the cafe glass, she saw the man's head lift. He stared at the car as if he recognized it. Then his phone rang. His face drained of color when he saw the caller ID. He looked up again, this time directly through the window. Not at her, at the coat. And for the first time since he walked out, fear flickered across his eyes. His phone vibrated harder than usual, rattling in his palm as if urgency itself had weight. He didn't answer it at first. He stared at the screen, reading the name again and again, hoping it would somehow change. Northbridge Holdings, Executive Office. There was no reason they should be calling him. Not tonight. Not after the meeting he had just left early. Not after the gamble he had taken by even agreeing to a blind date in the middle of a critical acquisition week. And yet, the phone kept ringing. Behind the glass of the cafe, she still hadn't moved. The brown coat remained folded in her hands, her posture unchanged, as if she were carved into the chair itself. Anyone else would have been crying by now. Anyone else would have stormed out. But she was still there, watching steam curl from her tea like time itself had slowed for her alone. He pressed the phone to his ear. Hello? There was a pause. Then a voice he recognized immediately, clipped and controlled. Where are you? His stomach tightened. I just stepped out for a moment. I'll be back in... Don't, the voice cut in. Turn around. He frowned. Excuse me? You're standing outside Briar Street Cafe, aren't you? He froze. His eyes darted to the dark car idling at the curb, to the tinted windows, to the driver who sat motionless behind the wheel. How do you know that? He asked. Another pause. He could almost hear the other man choosing his words. "You made a mistake tonight, and it's about to become very expensive if you don't listen." His chest tightened. "What mistake? I didn't do anything wrong. It was just a date." A breath crackled over the line. Not angry, not calm. Afraid. "Go back inside. Now." He let out a nervous laugh. "I'm not going back in there. That woman?" "That woman," the voice interrupted, "is not who you think she is." Silence stretched between them. The city hummed around him, unaware that his entire sense of control was slipping through his fingers. "Who is she?" he asked. The car door across the street opened. The driver stepped out, smooth and deliberate, scanning the sidewalk before fixing his gaze on the cafe window, on her. The voice on the phone lowered to almost a whisper. "Whatever you do, don't let her leave before you apologize." His heart slammed against his ribs. "Apologize for what? I didn't insult her." "You judged her," the voice replied, "and you did it publicly." "That doesn't—" "Turn around," the voice said again. "Please." For a second, he didn't move. Pride held him in place, stubborn and indignant. He had built his entire career on confidence, on reading people instantly, on knowing who mattered. But fear was louder. He turned. Through the cafe glass, he saw her for the first time without the filter of assumption. Not the coat, not the worn edges. Her face. There was no anger there, no pleading, just composure, and something else. Authority. The car door behind him closed with a soft, final sound. The call disconnected, and he understood far too late that walking away from that table might cost him everything. She didn't see the driver step out of the car. She was staring at the surface of her tea, watching her reflection tremble in the moving steam. For a brief moment, she let herself imagine that if she leaned close enough, she might disappear into it, become nothing but warmth and vapor, something no one could misjudge. She had once filled rooms without trying. There had been a time when she never arrived early, when places waited for her, when coats were chosen for cameras, not comfort. It felt like another lifetime now. The change hadn't come suddenly. It never did. It came in fractures, after the accident, after the funeral, after the headlines that wouldn't let her grieve in peace. The world had decided what her pain was worth and traded it for clicks and stock bumps and sympathy letters written by assistants. So she learned to disappear. The coat was the first step, not because she wanted to test anyone, not because she was running some cruel social experiment, but because when she wore it, no one expected anything from her. No curated smiles, no introductions that felt like contracts, no hands reaching for her that didn't belong there. In this coat, she was invisible, or so she thought. The door of the cafe opened again, letting in a thin ribbon of cold air. She didn't look up at first. She assumed it was another customer, another stranger who would glance at her table and then away. But the footsteps stopped too close. She lifted her eyes. He was standing there, just a few feet away, the same man who had walked out moments before. Except now, the casual confidence was gone. His shoulders were tense, his jaw tight, like he was bracing for impact. I think I owe you an apology," he said. The words felt rehearsed, fragile. She waited. Silence was her shield now. "I shouldn't have left like that. It was rude. I didn't mean to—" "Why did you?" she asked. Her voice wasn't accusing. It was curious, the way someone asks about a past mistake they've already accepted. He swallowed. His gaze dropped to the coat again, then snapped back to her face, as if afraid to be caught looking at the wrong thing. I thought we were looking for different things." She nodded once, a polite gesture that didn't invite further explanation. "I'm going to sit down," he said, uncertain. He reached for the chair he had abandoned earlier. Before he could pull it out, a hand rested on the back of it. Not hers. The driver stood there now, expression neutral, posture immaculate. The cafe seemed to hold its breath. "Miss Hale, the board is ready whenever you are." Her fingers tightened around the coat. The man froze mid-motion, eyes darting between them. "Miss Hale?" he repeated. She met his gaze at last, and for the first time since he had walked away, she let something real surface in her expression. Not anger, not pride. Truth. "Yes," she said. "That's my name."
He didn't follow her out of the cafe. Not immediately. He watched as she rose from her chair with calm precision, folded the coat once more, and handed it to the driver as if it were something valuable, something that mattered. The driver accepted it with both hands, nodding slightly before opening the door of the dark car for her. Only when the door closed behind her did the room begin to breathe again. People returned to their conversations. Cups were lifted. Laughter crept back into the corners. But he remained frozen at the table, staring at the empty chair across from him like it had become a warning sign. Miss Hale. He had heard the name 1,000 times in boardrooms and conference calls, whispered with a mixture of reverence and fear. Hale Group wasn't just a company, it was the company. The one that had quietly absorbed competitors, reshaped markets, and decided the fates of executives who never even saw it coming. And he had walked out on her because of a coat. The emergency meeting was scheduled for the next morning. He barely slept. When he did, the image of her hands clutching that fabric replayed behind his eyelids like a punishment that wouldn't let go. At 8:30 sharp, he entered the boardroom on the 42nd floor of Northbridge Holdings, the glass walls reflecting a skyline that looked sharp enough to cut. Everyone was already there. The CFO whispered to the legal director. The HR chair avoided his eyes entirely. The CEO's seat at the head of the table was empty, its leather untouched, as if waiting for someone more important than anyone currently present. "Why are we here?" he murmured to the man beside him. Before the man could answer, the doors opened. She stepped inside. No coat, no pretense. She wore a tailored black suit that fit her like authority itself. Her hair was pulled back neatly, her expression calm, unreadable. Every chair scraped the floor at once. She didn't smile. She didn't rush. She walked to the head of the table and stopped, behind the empty seat. "Good morning," she said. The sound of her voice in that room was different from the cafe, stronger, grounded, impossible to ignore. "I won't take much of your time, but I will take your attention." She glanced down at a folder in her hands, then lifted her eyes, and found him. Their gaze held for one suspended second, long enough for him to realize that nothing he had achieved in his career prepared him for the weight of that look. "Let's begin," she said. No one dared to sit until she did. No one spoke about the cafe. They discussed market fluctuations, contract revisions, and potential restructuring with the detached efficiency of people who believed words could still protect them. He contributed when asked, his voice steady despite the echo of last night pulsing in his ears. She never looked at him directly. It was worse than confrontation, worse than anger. Silence in that room felt deliberate. Halfway through the meeting, she raised her hand, and the discussion died instantly. "I'd like to address leadership alignment," she said, folding her hands on the table. "Specifically, the role of Northbridge Holdings in the Hale Group's next phase." Several executives shifted in their seats. "As of today, Northbridge is no longer a partner."
A ripple passed around the table, quiet but electric. He stared at her, disbelief tightening his throat. "With all due respect," he said before he could stop himself, "we've spent months preparing this merger." She finally turned her head. The look she gave him wasn't cruel, it was surgical. "Months of preparation," she repeated, "yet you couldn't spare 10 seconds of respect to someone you met face to face?" The room went still. He felt the blood drain from his cheeks. "That wasn't—" "You assessed value based on appearance. In business, that's a weakness. In life, it's a flaw." She rose from her chair, the soft scrape of it against the floor sounding louder than any gavel. "Effective immediately, the CEO position at Northbridge is under review. Interim leadership will be announced by end of day." Eyes darted to him, then away. He opened his mouth, searching for words that might salvage something, anything, but she had already turned toward the door. Before leaving, she paused. "I didn't come here for revenge," she said, her back still to the room. "I came here because silence, once broken, has consequences." Then she was gone, and the chair at the head of the table stood empty again, this time as an accusation. She returned to her office overlooking the river, where glass met sky and the city felt small below her. The driver placed the brown coat carefully on the back of a chair, as if it were something fragile, something that might shatter if handled without respect. "Cancel the rest of the day," she said quietly. "Yes, Miss Hale." When she was alone, she reached for the coat. The fabric was thinner than it once had been, the lining frayed in places. It had been her father's. He had worn it on the day he picked her up from college unannounced, laughing as he said that real success was the ability to leave without explaining yourself to anyone. 2 weeks later, he was gone. The accident had come without warning, without drama, just a phone call that changed the architecture of her life. And in the months that followed, people stopped seeing her as a person. She became a headline, a symbol, a market indicator. So she took the coat. It was never about humility or social tests. It was about grief, about keeping one thing in her hands that had never expected her to be anything other than a daughter. A knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she said, already knowing it would be someone she wasn't ready to see. A woman in her early 40s stepped inside, posture tense, eyes wide with disbelief. "Lena?" the woman whispered. She closed her eyes for half a second. That name hadn't been spoken in this room before. "Emily," she replied. "I didn't think you still worked here." "They told me you were gone, after everything that happened, after the press." "I left on purpose." The driver glanced at the coat. Recognition flashed across her face. "You still have it?" "Yes." A fragile silence settled between them, heavy with everything neither of them knew how to say. "People don't recognize you anymore. They don't know how to treat you." "That's the point. I wanted to know who I was when no one knew my name." Emily hesitated. "And did you find out?" Her gaze drifted to the window, to the blur of traffic far below. "I found out how easily people decide who deserves to stay." He waited in the lobby long after the elevators had stopped announcing her arrival. By the time she finally emerged, the building was quieter, emptied of the confident urgency that usually defined it. She walked toward the exit with the same steady composure she had shown in the boardroom, the coat folded over her arm like a silent witness. "Ms. Hale," he said, stepping into her path. She stopped, not because she had to, but because she chose to. "I'm not here as an executive," he said quickly. "I'm here as a man who made a mistake." She studied him, eyes clear, unreadable.
You were a man when you made it, too. He flinched at the truth in her words. I judged you, he admitted. I thought I could read a story from one detail. I didn't even try to know you. She waited. I'm not asking for anything, he continued. I just needed you to hear that I was wrong. The coat shifted slightly in her hands, as if it were breathing with her. You didn't leave because of the coat. You left because it gave you permission. He lowered his eyes. Permission for what? To stop seeing me, she replied. It's easier to walk away when you believe you already understand someone. A silence opened between them, wide and delicate. May I walk you to your car? He asked. No, she said, gently. The answer was not punishment, it was boundary. She stepped past him, but after 2 strides, she paused. People deserve more than second glances. They deserve first chances. Then she left, and he was alone again, this time with nothing to misunderstand.
The city blurred past her window as the car moved through traffic, lights stretching into pale ribbons across the glass. She watched without really seeing, her reflection hovering faintly over the dark river below. For years, she had perfected distance. Not isolation, distance. A precise, measured way of existing that kept the world from pressing too hard against old fractures. But something about his apology had unsettled that balance. Not because it erased what he had done, it didn't, but because it had been honest, awkward, unprotected by titles. Her phone vibrated once in her hand. An unknown number. She didn't open it at first. She already knew who it would be from. The building had eyes everywhere. Finding her number would have taken him less than a minute. She finally unlocked the screen. I don't expect you to answer, but I needed you to know that walking away from you last night is the thing I regret most in my career. She closed the message. The car stopped at a red light. She saw her own face in the window again, older than she remembered, softer than she allowed. She thought of the way he had looked at the coat, of how little it took to become invisible. Her thumb hovered over the screen. For a moment, she imagined deleting the message, protecting herself the way she always had, letting the story end cleanly, without risk. Instead, she typed 2 words. Meet me. She didn't include a place or a time, just the invitation. The light turned green. The car began to move again. And for the first time in years, she wasn't certain what she wanted to happen next. He didn't sleep. When the message arrived, just 2 words, meet me, he read it so many times that the letters began to blur into something unreal. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even kindness. It was possibility. She chose a place he would never have chosen himself, a quiet public park just after sunrise, where joggers passed without interest, and the city had not yet put on its armor. No drivers, no assistants, no reservations. She was already there when he arrived, sitting on a wooden bench facing the river, the brown coat folded neatly beside her instead of in her arms. For the first time, he noticed how young she looked in the morning light, how tired. You came, he said. So did you, she replied. They sat in silence at first, watching the pale sky stretch into something that might become a day worth remembering. I don't want to start with apologies, he said, eventually. I want to start with honesty. She nodded once. I've spent my life learning to recognize power. He thought it was something you wore, something that announced itself. I was wrong. She studied the water for a moment before answering. People don't need to be impressive to deserve attention. He looked at her then, not at the coat,
not at the woman the world had named, but at the person who had chosen to sit beside him now. "What do you want from me?" he asked quietly. She considered the question as if it were new to her, too. "I don't know yet, but I know what I don't want." He waited. "I don't want to be seen," she said, touching the coat gently, "before I'm known." The words settled between them, soft and heavy at the same time. The sun rose higher, runners passed, the city began to stir. He didn't reach for her hand, he didn't try to close the distance. He simply stayed, and for the first time since the cafe, she let the coat remain untouched, no longer a shield, but a memory resting quietly beside her. If this story touched you, please leave a like. It helps this channel grow more than you know. And don't forget to subscribe for more emotional stories like this one.